Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Deadlock Load, episode 16. My name is Cryptic here with BSJ. I am so excited after weeks of having to cancel episodes due to sickness, events, all sorts of stuff. We finally are back and ready to cover one of the biggest updates Deadlock has ever had. The full map rework, the 3 lanes, everything. Before we jump into it, Brian, how you feeling, man?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. Just got back from Dream League. I'm excited myself. I mean, it's funny. They're just really bad with timing to my schedule. You know, Valve, if you could just
True.
look at my agenda before you do these type of things, that'd be much appreciated. I was in the middle of in Sweden. I'm in the middle of an event. So yes, just got back yesterday. Feeling good, fresh, ready to talk about some Deadlock.
Yeah, and we're gonna kick things off. We got so much to talk about, so we're just gonna go right into some of the updates for the recent map rework, as Valve was calling it. But we're gonna start things in a little bit of a different spot. So we want to talk about, first off, some things that are more of like a quality of life, or what we kind of consider noob friendly changes to the game. And I think these are generally really good for like incoming players or like returning players. And these are things like the soul orb mechanic changes. So Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about how they've changed the soul orb mechanic for like the 30th time?
Yeah, so the biggest thing as I was like testing it out today, I was like, like I'm in the demo, I'm used to missing CS all over the place, but as long as you're within range of the creeps themselves, there used to be like a death animation that you had to make sure you finished off the creep, otherwise it would just explode with you getting nothing
Just
from
poof.
it. Yeah, literally poofed in front of your eyes. But now once I keep calling them creeps, but the troopers, when they drop to 0 HP, they just release a soul, whether or not it was you that dealt the finishing blow or whether or not it was a lane trooper of your own. And so what it means is that from my perspective, that it is important that you're kind of looking at the creep the trooper when it's dying, because if you're not and the opponent sees it, they're going to deny it. But what it means is there's less time spent shooting troopers, and it allows you to do things that are not shooting troopers, which means interacting with enemy heroes. That was my main, like, this is the effect that this is going to have. And it also means that honestly, at lower skill levels, it means everyone's still getting the same amount of souls. The only difference will be if you deny or not. But like the soul injection into the game is a natural mechanic now. You know, it's not going to be where you're absolutely new to the game and you're just getting half as much money between you and the opponent because neither of you's getting the last hit. And something about that just feels good. It feels way better that everyone's getting everything rather than like the deny mechanic still very important, and at the highest level this still absolutely matters. But
Yeah.
this idea that more shooting enemies, more interaction with enemies, and less punishment for not playing perfectly in a game that's very mechanically demanding.
That's the part about it I think that's really important, is like some people are like, this was like something that people complained about in Dota, but I'm sure all MOBAs is like when a change comes out and they're like, oh, you're reducing the skill ceiling of the game. And it's like, this Deadlock is such a flashy and complex game as is, that this is not one of those things that we're going to be like, oh, make it more difficult, to make it more like frustrating for new players, right? Like this is a really solid change. And they did change the percentage on the denies, right? So it used to be 65-35, it's now just 50-50. So denies, like you said, still a really big portion of the last hit now, right? So you need to actually be making an effort to go for the securing of the soul orbs. But this just doesn't punish new players that are still trying to learn the game. Like having no farm, not being able to buy items, or people that are returning and trying to like relearn game mechanics, and they're like overwhelmed from just trying to press their buttons, right? I think it's a great change. I like this one a lot. And the second big quality of life change, at least in my eyes, was the rework to sprinting. This is such a good, like, this is just a feels good man change. Like, I love this.
Yeah, so sprinting by default makes you a little bit faster than it did before. And the biggest part is that in the past, if you took damage from anything or did damage to anything, it was 5 seconds that you had to wait to sprint again. But now creeps are only half a second. So effectively, it's like, okay, you're not allowed to sprint immediately after taking damage or killing a creep, but That's it. It's half a second. It's effectively not impacting your sprinting at all. And for me, it feels good to move around the game fast. But I've also been a pretty big hater of the skill ceiling that is required with map movement. Like the difference between when there were 4 lanes, and sorry, spoilers, and somebody jumps off the zip line and does like 3 wall bounces on the way over to the other lane. It's like their travel speed as opposed to the guy that was new and just walking or sprinting. Like what I'm trying to say is close that gap. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that that skill differential should not be there, but it doesn't have to be they are 5 times faster than me when they have superior movement. Obviously, you're not playing against these players if you're new to the game, but the idea for me is the same, where I don't want to spend a lot of time and effort learning these move mechanics and feeling like I have to min-max those. I want to shoot people, man. I want to throw spells at people. So once again, it's the same idea. I think both these things make it so the focus on general mechanics are less important than getting to play the character that you're learning.
Yeah, I absolutely, like, there's just like these are things that we're gonna look back on and be really happy. Like they might still tweak the numbers on this in general, but I'll look really stupid when they revert these changes and people are like, "Hey, remember when you said this was really good for the game?" I'm just kidding. But yeah, overall, I think making the game more accessible to new players is always going to be a positive without removing the skill ceiling like we're talking about. Like there is still jump line tech, there is still wall bounce tech, like all that stuff still exists. We're just making it easier, right, for new players and for like the casual player as well. And I think that is just gonna make the game feel better, and that's really no downside at all. But a lot of what you're talking about, like these, will kind of like the sprints, the soul changes. A lot of this stuff is a byproduct of the overall largest update, which people probably know about at this point. But if you do not, Deadlock now has 3 lanes. We have removed one of the lanes. Green lane is gone, and it is now just, or is it purple lane? Oh my god, I feel like it was green lane, but I'll have to double check. Oh my goodness, maybe it was purple
Edit that
lane.
in post. Edit that in post.
I think it might be purple actually, but yeah, I think the thing that's crazy about this change is like for the longest time, one of the most iconic things of Deadlock was the fact that it was 4 distinct lanes instead of 3, which we see in traditional MOBAs. And this has massively changed the overall flow of the game. So I'm just curious. We can start the conversation in a bunch of different areas, but Brian, like, why do you think Valve has gone to 3 lanes? Like, realistically, like, what prompted this?
My gut feeling is that it felt really strange to be on either of the side lanes when there were 4, and it felt like there was too much to worry about between me and the far lane. It felt like as an individual hero in the game, I didn't have very much map impact in regards to they could be 2-manning one walker, 3-manning another, and have one guy jungling. But like, there's like a lot of things I had to worry about, I felt like. And I would just say that in this way of like worrying about your own objectives, you're usually playing around 1, maybe 2 of them, because you're sitting between 2 lanes when you're jungling or moving around the map. If I'm sitting between 2 lanes, there's only 1 lane I don't have information on, like just by visual, right? I can only use the minimap or teammate comms. But with 4 lanes, there's not only 2 extra lanes, but there's like an entire half of the map I just have no clue what's going on. And I think in a MOBA itself, that's not nearly as bad because you can move your camera. Like you can just move your camera to some other lane and see exactly what's happening there. But in Deadlock, it just felt like my general spatial awareness of like I didn't even feel like I was involved with the other half of the map. So I feel like the 4 kind of, honestly, I do think this is also dumbing it down a little bit, like in a good way, in a good way, that less to worry about in regards to objectives, more to worry about in regards to farming, jungle. I know that's what you really want to talk about, and just hero interaction once again. So these objectives, the lane troopers, the walkers, they're all important. Don't get us wrong. But when the entire map is littered with lanes, so many to the point that you don't even interact with half the people that are in the game that are in these lanes, then that's not necessarily what I think makes a game fun. So I know you wanted to talk about like the efficiency of the jungle. How does it feel for you with like the new 3 lanes and the bigger jungle areas?
It's nice. It actually feels like you're going into the jungle to just soak up a bunch of farm. Like camps are way more densely populated as opposed to being kind of like picked and choose, like kind of plopped in different areas where you're like, oh, well, I have to go to this lane, so I might as well grab a creep camp along the way. Like now it's like, okay, lanes are in a good state. I'm gonna retreat into the jungle really quick, clear this like trio of camps, grab a sinner sacrifice maybe, and then I'm gonna go back to lane. And it completely changes kind of like the general flow. And I think one of the things that like from a player perspective with 4 lanes that I think I was really bummed out on, like looking back on it, was how often you were addressing lane lane
True.
pressure. Like
Yeah.
so much of the game for a long time, you're like, oh, okay, I gotta go deep push this lane. And then you look over and you're like, oh, 2 of my other lanes are now in a bad spot. Gotta go deep push these lanes. And it's like you're just on lane management the whole time. And it's wild how much just removing one of those lanes has fixed that issue. And it just makes it so you're like, okay, I actually have time to do other things besides just lane management, right? Because there's, 6 heroes on 4 lanes somehow wasn't enough when it came to managing the lanes, right? Like
Yeah.
it's wild how much extra like pressure and stuff that put on the map. But now with 3 lanes, yeah, you actually have the ability to make plays as a team. You're not constantly like going back and trying to stop troopers from taking an entire, set of like your base guardians and your shrine because like a wave accidentally pushed too far. So like stuff like that, I think are just like you said, it is dumbing the game down in a way, but also just making it like the game loop feel better, and like giving players more choices. And I think that's generally very good. Um, but one of the things you also mentioned was like how those outside lanes felt kind of awkward. I think solo lanes in general were like a little bit of a um some people they're like kind of a hot debated topic. Some people really liked solo lanes because they're like, I'm gonna outskill my opponent. And then other people who were forced to play a solo lane was like, God, I freaking hate being in the solo lane, right? And it's just it makes this game like a lot more evenly set, right? From one lane to the next. You're not like, okay, I'm in the solo lane. Hopefully my dual lane next to me doesn't lose, so I'm not getting ganked on cooldown every 5 seconds, right? Like I think those types of things as well just generally make for a better experience for all players because if you're, coming back and you get put in a solo lane and you get rocked, it's not going to be a fun experience.
Yeah, and the biggest thing for me, so first off, all things you said, it sounded like there's a lot less things that are not shooting heroes or throwing spells at heroes. A lot less of things that are not those, right? Which is
Yeah.
good. And but also even when I was like spamming Deadlock, it felt like I had to individually practice solo lanes and individually practice dual lanes. Like they just worked very differently
Oh,
than like the dynamic of like, do I go for creeps out on the side? Like the positioning I needed to have, the patience or the aggression was highly varied. And it also was where some people would be very good in dual lanes and some people and not have any clue what to do in a solo lane. Also, there's like certain here you have to then think like, okay, are these with a small hero pool? First off, you had like 25 overall heroes. What heroes function best in solo lanes? Sometimes your lineup doesn't have a good solo laner. There's like all these random things. Or you can just make every lane a dual lane, and the balance of the game, the mechanics of the game, the process for learning the game, you're gonna be 2 heroes against 2, and the only variance is like the terrain of whatever lane you're put into, which is enough variance, I think, in and of itself. And the different matchups you'll get, the synergies you can have if you're in a duo queue, or like there's just no worrying about, yeah, there's just like you mentioned the getting ganked by the dual lanes. I just think it creates a lot of lopsidedness and inconsistencies that, yeah, once again, it's just you have to have a bit of streamline, I think, in these type of games where there's just a cookie cutter path during the laning phase, because The laning phase in Deadlock is very engaging, and it is like a very tense, like 5 to 10 minutes of the game where like you step out of position, you die, and all this kind of stuff where you have to be properly positioned, think about buying items. Like there's a lot to worry about. So just making some of the parameters more consistent, I think it's good for experienced players and for inexperienced players alike. And there's always going to be people that had something and they're upset that it's gone. That's always going to be the case. When I look at this type of stuff, it's like, yeah, there were times I enjoyed solo laning, but for me, out of all of the things that involve 3 lanes, like I remember thinking it instantly, like, oh, there's no solo lanes anymore. And thank you for reminding me. That one for me, I felt like was very obvious why they did that. Meaning, like, that makes a lot of sense that it's just dual lanes across the board, in regards to the learning curve of the game and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's certain heroes that thrived in solo lanes, and people who mained those heroes are going to be upset. And like I remember looking at the Reddit the day that this whole thing came out, and there was posts being like they killed Deadlock. The only iconic thing in Deadlock was the 4 lanes, but I think a lot of people's opinions switched on that pretty dang fast. They're like, well, it actually feels pretty good, having 3 lanes and a dedicated jungle. And like, the jungle is dense now. There are so many creep camps. There are sinner sacrifices freaking everywhere. There's breakables all over the map. They have what I like to refer to as the vault now, in like just above or like below mid lane before you get to mid boss now, that spawns at 10 minutes. And there's just like 20 maybe more, honestly, like breakables of like golden statues and boxes just that spawn at 10 minutes below mid lane. And it's like a legitimate like objective that people are playing for now. And it's just
That's cool.
it's cool. Like it's just other things to do where you're not like, oh, if I'm gonna go for these boxes or if I'm gonna go for this jungle camp, my like creep wave is gonna be at my tower now or my walker. um but I think it's good. I think all of this stuff are like really solid changes. um One quick little note is the total amount of souls on the map is actually still the same. Like all the lanes now give 33% more souls than they used to. So you get the same amount of souls that we did in the 4 lane setup, but now it's just in the 3 lane setup. So like games aren't like extended in length now because there's less money on the map, which I think is a generally good thing. We don't really want longer games in Deadlock. I think right now the play length is actually in a pretty good spot. I feel like most of the games are between 30 and 40 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people they choose games based on like you don't want to commit an hour and 20 minutes. You want to be able to say, "Oh, I have an hour. I'll easily fit in one game, no question." Maybe a long game will reach that limit, but even in a game like Dota where you end up in like a 2-hour game sometimes you're like, "Ah, fuck."
Yeah, dude.
I told the girlfriend I was going to be doing the chores, but no. I guess like just through the note of how I feel about people who have like visceral reactions, like gut reactions to changes. I always try my best to ask why did they do this, as my first reaction, and how tone deaf do I feel like developers are. An example I think I've used on some of our past episodes was Diablo 4.
Yeah.
I thought on release that game was super hype. I was really excited about it. I was playing the shit out of the game. And then the first update came out, and I remember going into that update that I had like a general idea of what was wrong with the game, but I'm not a game designer. Let's have some humility here. I didn't know exactly what was going to fix it, but I had an idea of what I thought I should see. Not like exact changes, but what the changes would imply, the implications of these changes. And obviously, when you look at changes, and I'm saying don't just immediately go, ugh, it's like, but okay, let's think about the implications of these things, right? And so when I saw the first update for Diablo 4, I got the impression, I'm like, these are the most tone-deaf devs I've ever seen. Like, I haven't played a Blizzard game religiously in a long time. And so, and I'm always heard the famed WoW developers of old, of the classic WoW, where people are just like, oh, every update's god tier. And so I see that stuff and I'm like, that not only doesn't address a single concern I had, but it also like removed 4 fun things from the game. And at the end of the day, removing a fourth lane, okay, sure, you can make the argument that it makes the game unique, because it's like the only MOBA-esque game that had 4 lanes. But what does like uniqueness do in regards to gameplay, right? Like, why is novelty or uniqueness like just for the sake of it, right? Obviously, you want a game to have nuance to it and to be something fresh and exciting. But Deadlock's already that. Deadlock is already a fresh and exciting game that's meant to mesh 2 genres. That itself is new and special. So I guess I'm just I kind of internally am just laughing at people who would say like, but the identity of the game. It's like, no, dude, it's the fucking fact that it's a MOBA shooter with unique game mechanics that's combining some of our favorite genres and somehow seamlessly doing it in an exciting, fun spellcasting shooter kind of way. And it's not just like, you know, you have Valorant that's kind of like a spellcasting CSGO. That's cool. Like, that's an extension of CSGO, while this is more of a spellcasting shooter version of Dota. Like, you have the spellcasting from Dota, you have the shooter aspect of shooter. So it's just, for me, that's already so special. And so if you think that these like top tier game devs are gonna like, I would at least hope, okay, by the way, I'm hoping, because you know there's always the human element of pride and ego. I would hope that they can have a perspective of like, what are we trying to do with this game? And it's not about trying to be cool for the sake of it. It's trying to create a fun experience. And we said every change we feel like we saw, including this one, is what is preventing people from interacting with each other. Too many lanes to deal with, too many objectives to worry about, too much time spent running around to clear these things rather than thinking about, oh, there's an objective in the middle of the map that like is exciting, and it's like, it is fun to break things, and it is fun to like go through a bunch of jungle camps. I've played MOBAs for like 15 years. It's so fun to just be efficient like that and know like, oh, I'm gonna hit a sick item because I'm gonna get like 800 souls from this area. Like, that kind of stuff is fun, and it's fun to know like I'm consciously, one of the worst feelings I had in old Deadlock, something I feel like was addressed with the jungle and like the lower respawn times, was that the camps would just run out on the map. So it felt like the way the game was played was that people would be ramping up their power. The first round of jungle camps, you'd almost clear them all by the time they'd respawn. Like, there would almost always be like a few camps on the map that were left. But then like the second respawn of all the camps, people would spend all the time killing everything. Like, that was like required. You had to go do that. And then there's like a 2 or 3 minute window where there's no camps left. And then you just have to go fight each other. Like, that's not fun either. It's not fun in a MOBA as setting to have to go fight them. Like, it's the choice. It's the freedom of choice that I think that they're aiming for. And I get that sense. I'm like, oh yeah, like that's what they're going for. And even if you disagree with me, you know, as a viewer, that you don't like, or us, I guess, that you don't like the 3 lanes, I guess I would just keep in mind that this is probably what they're going for, at least in this realm, and appreciate it for what it is. Or I guess leave if you really hate it that much. But I don't think these are the type of changes that aren't going to drive away current players. They're not like ruining the identity of the game. We're also in a time where they need to be looking to bring players back or advertise, or like appeal to new players. And sometimes the new players can be people that played other games. So bringing in some familiar aspects of other games can absolutely do that, as I think I just spoiled our next section.
Yeah, well, I mean, not too much of a spoiler.
Yeah.
I think this last section is, or I guess the next section here is pretty interesting. It's a really cool kind of idea and concept, which is kind of at its core, Deadlock is still a MOBA, and this is a genre that has been around for a long time. It has been optimized and put through the grindstone, right, over the years to make it as enjoyable as a genre as possible. And the idea that Deadlock, you know, is a new game in development is trying to iterate and expand on that genre. And that's where we lead with the 4 lanes, right? That's how we get there. But somehow through this process of development, we end up back at the tried and true MOBA classic of 3 lanes. And it's one of the, I'm down to let you kind of talk about how the fact that like the past has now influenced the future once again.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is more philosophical outside of Deadlock, but I'll bring it back, people. I promise. I feel like a
Uh-huh.
lot of times when you are progressing in life, it's very easy to get consumed with all the things you're thinking about. And when that happens, you forget the basics sometimes. And a lot of times, like when I find myself overwhelmed, I have to reset and go back to my roots, go back to the foundation, the things that I kind of like that led me here in the first place. And it's usually just something that, oh, I used to do this a few years ago and I just don't do it anymore. And then I suddenly have this and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember why I did this. It felt so good this way. Like it was such a healthy habit, or it really made me like clear my head to do this, like to go play basketball with my friends or something. And you forget the power of these things until you remove them for long enough of a time where you're like, I can't really pinpoint what's missing, but there's something that I know I'm used to having that's not there. And I feel like that's kind of what happens in video games sometimes, especially in new gen games that are expanding upon current games, is that, you know, you almost ask yourself, why didn't they start this game with 3 lanes? Was it for the sake of trying something new? Was it for the sake of trying to distance themselves from other MOBAs? There could be all types of reasons that they initially went with 4. I personally, what's funny is I didn't ever found myself questioning why they originally went with 4, which I almost like regret not questioning, like, huh, why did they go
Yeah.
with 4, right? And so people are just assuming 4 is the norm for Deadlock when this game is like been released for less than a year and it's been in development for, you know, way less time than the MOBAs, right? And these MOBAs, like you said, have iterations, patches after patches after patches. And the fact that a mechanic survived 15 years of patches across 2 MOBAs that are like the most popular games in the world, League of Legends and Dota, the fact that that mechanic stayed true, neither of the companies decided like we should change that. You don't change it if it's working, like, period. You just don't change it if it's working. Like, if you feel like something's wrong, you will tweak it. So there's plenty of things, like, I know way more about Dota than I do about League. They've made so many changes to the map itself. So it's no shock to me that as Deadlock's future progresses, that they will continue changing the terrain of the map and adding new objectives and adding new ways to move around and things to worry about, but in a good way. So it's just, I guess all I'm trying to say with all of this is I feel like it's the same in real life. For people who like myself, I can relate. I'm not a game designer, and I think most of the people listening are not game designers. That sometimes you just forget how much thought went into an idea before the idea that was being used before yours, and you end up trying to do your own thing. And it's important because then you learn like, oh, we did 4 lanes, but then here's a reason it didn't work, and maybe we're getting a better glimpse into why they never did 4 lanes. And you can only know it if you try it. So I totally respect and admire the fact that they went for it. But I also think, like, you know, like we said, the past is the future in regards to the games, that it was a tried and true mechanic. There's so many new things about about Deadlock compared to Dota, because it's Valve. I'm comparing it mainly to Dota. And just because it's not like we can't be consumed with ego. It's okay to just be like, yeah, we tried, but the people before us already knew better. That's just like history lesson in a nutshell, but applied to gaming.
Yeah. You know, then the next question is always going to be like, well, there's 6 heroes as opposed to 5, right? Like, are we going to reduce
True.
the heroes, down to 5? And now it's like, now we should question this, right? Like, it's like,
Absolutely.
is that a possibility? Like, I think it could be. Like, we were just a few moments ago talking about how the side lane solo lanes felt terrible, but mid lane solo lane is like a staple in
That is a
MOBAs, and we're
staple.
like,
True.
could we bring back mid lane solo lanes? Is 6 heroes necessary? And I don't know. I'm not the developer. I think Valve may very well like try it. Like it's one of those things that during this whole thing, like they are trying to make the best game possible. They're iterating, doing all sorts of different things to Deadlock, and it wouldn't shock me if at some point they're like, we're gonna do an experiment and we're gonna play Deadlock with 5 heroes for 1 week, type of thing,
Yeah.
and just see what happens, right? Like they have the ability to do that, and I think that's super cool because it's not fully out yet, and like them experimenting and, like you said, not having this ego of like, no, we have the better idea. Like, sometimes 3 lanes, 5 heroes, It's been a proven thing at this point, and like maybe that's where we're headed. But for now, 3 lane 6 heroes, it still feels better
Yeah.
than where we were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the metaphor I would use is like, you know, where Valve is the like 10-year-old kid that thinks he knows better than his grandpa, you know, even though it's like the same company. It's like, you don't know anything, grandpa. And it's like, well, he's had like 60, 70 years of wisdom on you. And, you know, if we take the comparison, it's like MOBAs have been around for 20-ish years. Deadlock's been around for just a couple in terms of development, and then one, or, you know, 5 years, I think, in development, and then 1 year that it's been released. So the idea is that there's tons of prior game design wisdom to be tapped into. I really wanted to talk about this on our episode because I spent a lot of Dream League. For people who don't know, I spent it a lot with Jenkins, and we also both know Suns fan really well, and they're making their own game currently. So they both have a lot to say about just game design as a whole, the process, the mistakes you make along the way, the reason you make changes, like kind of how you come to the realization you do have to make a change. And the part of the deadlock we're in right now, and you and I and I think there's a lot of people that are like, where is this gonna go? You know, there's kind of the like there's curiosity and eagerness about this process, and it's cool to think that we're gonna get a mixture of ideas we've never seen before. Deadlock's already presented that, and I'm sure it's gonna present more. But then it's also gonna be things that we're familiar with as gamers. I think of like when you think of platformers, right? And like I play a new platformer and I'm like, how do I double jump? And it's not because I knew that game had a double jump in it, but it's because double jumps become a staple mechanic of every single platformer ever, right? So, or at least most of them. So that's like, I don't know, there's like a fun novelty about that sort of thing, the familiarity aspect. And you know, I mentioned way back when in one of our episodes that I was sad that they kept changing Hayes' identity so much. Where I felt like I had to learn a new hero when I learned Hayes. And I'm like, I want the option to play a hero that I already know or go learn a new one. And I think that kind of holds true with games as an entirety, where it's like, I have aspects that are familiar to me from previous games that are going to carry me. So I'm not complete fucking garbage at the start of this game. I'm still garbage, but not complete fucking garbage. But then there's going to be things that I add on to it. So even just like, I imagine if I'm a MOBA player and I briefly touch Deadlock or I haven't touched it at all, having 3 lanes is way more familiar to me than having 4. And that actually means a lot, I think, when it comes to breaking the barrier. Something that we are also talking about, me and Jenkins, was the fact that Dota has a weird privilege in terms of game design, that you can do some crazy complicated shit because most of your player base has played this game for like 10 plus years. So you can experiment with stuff that like makes the game harder to play, but because who's trying to learn this game anyway? There are people that join Dota, but very few. But to be frank, you don't have that luxury designing Deadlock. You can make Deadlock a complex, fun game, but all the subjects we've been talking about, the quality of life changes from this update, the map rework to 3 lanes, and then also making the jungle more MOBA-esque, these things are effectively making it easier to get into this game based on the history of gaming as a whole. And that the barrier to entry has to be low enough. Like, it has to be low enough for people to want to get into this game. And we are at a state where the game is on people's radar, but it's going to need to make a resurgence. And, you know, you and I are both here because we believe in Valve and their, you know, game design genius, and that can happen. But for people who are playing this game already, just know that that's what needs to happen. And, you know, you're not like in the cool kids club because you stuck around. We need to bring more people here. I just don't want a repeat of Dota where there's like this, like, are you a Dota player or not? Like, and if you're not committed to this game, get the fuck out. Like, there's like a very gatekeepy mentality in the Dota community. And I don't, like, just for the people who are so resistant to this change in Deadlock, I think you're doing the same thing. You're repeating history. And so I feel like, you know, I feel like I'm philosophizing here. Maybe that's the interacting with Jenkins a lot recently. He does that all the time. But yeah, past is future, whether it's in the game, whether it's in the community itself, whether it's in the mechanics of the game or the feel of the game or the barrier to entry of the game. There's so much to learn from our past, and I admired. I felt like there was humility in this update. Basically, I felt a degree of humility where it's like, just go back to our roots, dumb it down. Doesn't have to be the most complex game ever.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It doesn't need to be the most complex game, and I think always reducing the barrier to entry is going to be generally great for Deadlock in the future. And we've talked about how we think that summertime is going to be the kind of big announcement, big reveal, big release for Deadlock. So we are 3, maybe 4 months
Yeah,
away from that, you know, and then like this is a pretty massive update. And to me, this looks like the permanent state. Like this is where like I don't think that they're iterating on this anymore. I think we are staying at 3 lanes. They're gonna do art passes and stuff, which big shout out to the art team again, who does the work on Deadlock because the 3 lanes are are becoming more and more iconic.
yeah.
We talked about way in the past Park, which was the previous purple lane. It's now the green lane. So I don't know if they're going to rename it to Greenway or something, but it's very weird that 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 was the color that was removed because each of the lanes like referred to its color, right?
Yeah.
Like York was yellow, Broadway was blue, Park was purple, Greenway was green. But now we have Park is green, so it's I mean it's whatever.
Parks
But
in real life are
that's
green.
yeah, but like in general, each of the lanes are coming into more of their own exclusive look, which is something that we've always wanted. We really just appreciate like that attention to detail. There's tons and tons and tons of like signage and new art pieces that they added into the map that you guys can see for yourselves. And speaking of which, one quick way to do that is they did add a like explore map feature. This is something I was going to mention earlier and I totally forgot. But you can just like load up the map and run around without having to queue up a bot game or do the console command that if you actually knew about the console command previously, uh, you don't need to do that. You can just go walk around in the Deadlock world and explore this new map for yourself and see what it's all about. So highly recommend doing that. You know, for any of the new players or returning players, it'll get you a lot more familiar with your surroundings because it can be, you know, a little overwhelming, but I love it, man. I think this is a huge win for Deadlock. I'm really excited for what the next big update is going to be. You know, we don't really know. I think you and I had talked about how we were looking for a big map change now that we got the 4 heroes added. So maybe the next update's going to be more heroes, or we're going to see more map. We don't really know, but we can keep our fingers crossed. Before we end the episode, though, we have the one segment that never leaves. The what did you learn, or what did I learn this week? So I don't remember who went first last time.
I'll just say it was me, so you can go first this week.
Okay. So for me, this is maybe more of like a recommends type of thing. But what I learned this week, in the waiting, I guess for both Deadlock and Dota's patch, I picked up a new game called Dave the Diver, which was a game that I had seen get released a while ago, and I really wanted to play it, but it was just been sitting on my wish list forever, and I never got around to playing it. And I finally got around to playing it, and I gotta say, I learned that it is one of the best games I've ever played.
I tuned into a couple of your Dave the Diver streams. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It
That
looked like you were having fun when I tuned in. I never played
it's
it
just so
myself.
good, super chill, such a good vibe, and just like genuinely, the game has a little bit of everything. It's like 20 games rolled into one. It's actually insane, but very, very, very fun game. And yeah, I get to kind of extrapolate this into something more is don't tunnel vision yourself on just one game. Like we're all Deadlock and Dota players, or maybe you're a Valorant or a League player. There's a lot of other games out there. Take a break, every once in a while, and play a new game that interests you because you might like it more than you think you would.
Very wholesome. Yeah, I'll follow it up with a wholesome one of my own. I guess. So I just got done with Dream League for 2.5 weeks, and I spent almost the entire time working with Jenkins and Sheever, who've been two of my best friends within Dota for a long time now, and also Lacoste, who's been a friendly colleague of mine as well. And they were just an amazing group of people to work with. And I guess what I truly learned is how much creativity and passion and enjoyment for a job can be influenced by just working with really your best friends. Like, there's a difference between a friendly colleague. Like, I became more than just a friendly colleague with Lacoste this event. That sounded sexual, but the idea being that, I got to know him better than just being a colleague. And I
I'm
feel
sure
like
you did.
but the point is that I felt like this event, it just like unlocked an entirely different aspect of working for me. And I learned a lot about my own ability to surpass my limits by virtue of the people I surround myself with. So I guess I'll just kind of put it out there, guys, that it's not, it's obviously you don't always have to do everything alone, but when it comes to work, it can have a huge impact on you who you choose to work with if you do have the choice, and look for opportunities to find the right people. I feel like I really understood like why people prioritize who they work with. Like, the wisdom of older people have told me, like, be really wary of the people you work with and the company you choose and all that kind of stuff, because I felt that so much for the last couple weeks. And yeah, it just gave me a really fresh perspective moving forward. So a lot of fresh stuff, whether it's Deadlock or life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there is still so much to unpack from Deadlock
Absolutely.
and in this patch, and it's one of those things that we kind of wanted to talk about the overall influence that this patch has on incoming, returning, or current players, rather than sit here and read off the patch notes, because there's a lot of balance changes, or not a ton of balance changes, a lot of bug fixes, a lot of like little details and stuff like that. But we think the conversation of how this affects Deadlock and kind of like theory crafting as to like why these changes are happening was just something that we would kind of prefer to explore. And we hope you guys enjoyed listening, whether it be on Spotify or watching us on YouTube. We really appreciate it, and that's going to bring Deadlock and Load episode 16 to an end. And we really are excited for what we have coming up next. So we want to say thank you all for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next week with our first ever guest episode. Cross our fingers that we don't have to reschedule it again, but if we do, we'll still have an episode out. So we'll see you all then.
Peace.